Hello, welcome. This is November's Editors Roundtable, and we are missing a couple of our editors. Liz and Lee weren't able to join us today, but I'm excited to chat through our topic around uh, love and service is kind of how we grouped this topic. It was honing in on the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31. But I think the virtuous woman really is this detailed picture of love and service. And so one of the things that I think is interesting about Proverbs is that obviously it's words of wisdom, but we even have Proverbs culturally, right, that you can memorize and learn. Well, these were Proverbs that Solomon had shared, and many of them are, I think, what I would term as just practical wisdom, right, on how we live our lives. And so that's one of the things that I'm kind of hoping to discuss and work through when considering love and service as Christians. And I know for me, this was a great study. So where my kids go to school, they actually have a little chant that they do called the Virtue Sound Off. And so it's what was resonating in my mind as I was developing the article I wrote about all of these cardinal virtues and the theological virtues, and then really meditating on how this woman in Proverbs 31 reflects those particular virtues. But I also think thinking through these more practical proverbs, how does that reflect some of these same virtues, right? How do we live this virtuous life? And some of it is not necessarily this deep theological study. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm just saying some of it is this practically living out what you're learning day to day with your neighbors and your spouses and your kids and in society. So one of the things, Jillian, speaking of all of that, I know I had listed in the original question, and I'll let you tackle which ones you'd like to specifically hone in on, but there are so many practical proverbs about living as a good neighbor or as a good society member, maybe even as a good way to put it. And so I was hoping maybe you could describe some of those proverbs, like the ones that you found particularly interesting or helpful, and then how do those acts of small services feed into this larger picture of our Christian life?
Got it. Well, thank you. Yes, some of these had me laughing, so I love them. Okay, so I wanted to go through the ones that you gave one by one, as some of them, like I said, are interesting to say the least. Each of these proverbs give guidance on being a good neighbor and showing good manners, as you talked about. These teachings, though specific, offer us insights, though, into the Christian life, illustrating how these seemingly small actions can contribute to our Christian journey. So let's start by considering how each of these words of wisdom can still profoundly impact our lives today. As we examine each Proverbs, we'll see that they're not just old sayings, but practical advice that can guide us in our everyday interactions and decisions. All right, so the first one you gave was Proverbs 23, verses 1-3. When you sit down to eat with a ruler, observe carefully what is before you and put a knife to your throat if you are given to appetite. Do not desire his delicacies, for they are deceptive food. So this proverb advises caution and restraint, especially in potentially tempting situations. It's a reminder to uphold integrity and self-control, which are key elements in the Christian life. So for each of these, I also wanted to kind of give a practical application, because not many of us eat with kings these days. So so in the workplace, I was thinking this might look like something like avoiding office politics or gossip, or not being swayed by different things that could compromise your values. In your family life, it could mean teaching children the value of simplicity and being content. So again, just the idea, while seemingly an innocuous proverb in there, it's going back to the self-control and integrity. All right, so the next one you gave was Proverbs 3, verse 29. Do not plan evil against your neighbor who dwells trustingly beside you. So advising against planning harm to a trusting neighbor, this proverb emphasizes the importance of harmony and trustworthiness in our community interactions, reflecting Jesus's teaching to love our neighbors. This could involve not spreading rumors about neighbors or colleagues. It's about building trust by being reliable and keeping your promises, whether it's returning just something that you borrowed from a neighbor or to something like meeting a deadline at work. So again, this comes back to the trustworthiness and the harmony piece of it. living in harmony with your neighbors. All right, next one, Proverbs 25 verses 8-9. Do not hastily bring into court for what will you do in the end when your neighbor puts you to shame? Argue your case with your neighbor himself and do not reveal another's secret. All right, so this encourages resolving issues directly with our neighbors rather than escalating conflicts. Again, the concept that we also see obviously in the New Testament. It aligns with our Christian values of peace and reconciliation. This might mean having a calm face-to-face conversation to resolve a misunderstanding with a neighbor rather than complaining to others or resorting to legal action. In a professional setting, this could involve trying to resolve conflicts through direct communication rather than immediately escalating it to HR or your boss. So again, trying to be that peaceful person to, again, not be a doormat, but you to have conflict resolution as a Christian should. All right, so then the next two I grouped together, Proverbs 11:12 and Proverbs 14:21. These are talking more about kindness and empathy. All right, so the first one, whoever belittles his neighbor lacks sense, but a man of understanding remains silent. And then the next one, whoever despises his neighbor is a sinner, but blessed is he who is generous to the poor. So these proverbs really highlight the importance of being kind and understanding rather than belittling or despising others, particularly the poor. They echo the Christian call to empathy and compassion. All right, so some applications of this are to practice empathy by not judging others based on first impressions or socioeconomic status. In a community context, again, this could involve volunteering at a local charity, and then just really trying to be mindful and showing compassion towards those in need, which again, all ties very much into Christian values that we see in the New Testament. All right, and then some of these were my favorites. Proverbs 25 verse 17 and Proverbs 27:14. These are really talking about respect and consideration. Sorry. Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest he have his fill of you and hate you. I was telling Amy that we need to have this as like the welcome sign at our house. All right. Whoever blesses his neighbor with a loud voice rising early in the morning will be counted as cursing. All right. So advising moderation in our interactions, these proverbs teach respect for each other's space and boundaries, essential for maintaining healthy relationships. So this might look like being mindful of how often you ask others for favors, or again, overstaying your welcome when you visit friends. Hopefully they won't hate you, but that's what I'm saying. But to be mindful of those things, ensuring you're not being a burden to others. Or this could also look like respecting a neighbor's quiet time by not mowing your lawn early in the morning when you know their baby is sleeping. So all of these things of just being considerate to those that you are interacting with. All right, so each of these proverbs, while addressing everyday behaviors, feeds into this larger picture of Christian life by emphasizing godly virtues like self-control, trust, peace, kindness, and respect. All of these small daily practices are foundational to living a life that truly reflects Christ's teachings and love. Remember, it's through these small, consistent acts of virtue that we shine as lights in the world, embodying the love and grace of Christ in a way that touches the lives of those around us. Let's take these proverbs to heart, allowing them to shape our actions and attitudes as we walk in faith and love.
That's great, Jillian. And I always laugh at the last one. I happen to be a morning person, and so in fact, I can still remember in high school that we had like a really early morning basketball practice, and people were like, "Why are you this happy?" And so it was probably my first introduction, and
to realize not everyone's happy. Yeah,
everybody's happy in the morning, but I do think it is even little things, right? Just trying to be, it's trying to notice how you are impacting others, right? And just being mindful and respectful of that. Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Jillian. So, one of the articles that really struck me this time by one of the guest authors, Randy, was Julia Huntley's, where she was describing the importance of wisdom as it relates to life and service. And in particular, she really honed in on the fear of the Lord, right? That's the beginning of wisdom. That's what we're told. And so I think what this makes me sit back and think about, though, is that non-Christians can live lives of service, right? I mean, they can go and start nonprofits, they can go serve others, they can be like what Jillian was describing, they can have good manners and they can be great neighbors. So what is the difference? And I think this is what I'm trying to understand. How is the life of a Christian, particularly when you're honing in on the fear of the Lord, how is that different than living a life like that? Just living a quote unquote good life, right? Where you're helping others and having good manners and being a good neighbor.
Yeah, so I thought it would be helpful to first look at the purpose and the outcome of the service of Christians, because I do think that's really where the difference lies. In 1 Peter 2, we're told, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God in the day of visitation." 2 Corinthians 9 as well, it talks about the cheerful giver. This is often read before, we give money on Sundays, but it's really just talking about generosity as well. In verse 12, it says, "For the ministry of this service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. By their approval of the service, they will glorify God because of your submission that comes from your confession of the gospel of Christ and the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others." So I feel like I read, especially the one in 2 Peter or 1 Peter a lot. We've talked about this idea a lot, that as Christians, we are the light, and that the world sees God through us, right? We get to be a part of his glorification through our service, through our actions. And we see this idea, in the lampstand, in the tabernacle, and also then that idea is carried over to the temple. We're living stones, where we are the light of the world. And we see this over and over again. Our actions and our service should be something that allows others to see God through us. And it should inspire others to glorify God. So is there a difference? Absolutely, right? Romans 8, it talks about the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided that we suffer with him in order that we may also be glorified with him. I believe that what allows us participation in this glorification is that we are children of God. If people are not God's children, then I don't believe we have any evidence that they get to participate in this. But of course, the good news is that anyone can be adopted into Christ, just like we were, right? They can be a part of it. And Paul also tells us in Philippians 1, verse 15, starting in verse 15, he addresses when people do good things for either the wrong reasons, for the wrong motivations. It says, "Some indeed preach Christ from envy and revelry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put there for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ without selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to affect me by my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice." So we don't know people's hearts, and we can't judge motivations, but we can take comfort in knowing that God is glorified either way.
So I think that's great, Randy, and absolutely true. I think a lot about it's truly about the motivation, right? I could want to really support something, but as soon as you butt up against my motivation, right, then I may have a very different response versus if my motivation is really about what God is wanting, right? I transferred that motivation to him, and it's not about my personal preferences or wants, right? So even if somebody is combating that, it's not me they're combating, right? It's they're up against what the motivations of God are. And so, and I think that's very hard to separate, even for Christians, right? Sometimes thinking through that, saying, that's really what we're doing, right? It's not about me. It's not about me getting the spotlight or the glory. It's about God getting the spotlight and the glory. So no, I really appreciate that. And I know we talked briefly, Randy, about the question that I had for Liz, that as a wife, honestly, sometimes it sets it sets on me hard that in Proverbs 21, verse 9 and 19, we talk about, the writer talks about, it's better to live either in the desert or in the corner of a housetop than with a quarrelsome or fretful wife. And I actually think in some ways these things go hand in hand. What is your motivation, and what are you leaning on? And so I think as women, sometimes we can tend toward this problem more so, where we end up fretful. And I think even the quarrelsome nature is coming on because we're fretful, right? We're anxious and we're worried. It reminds me of Mary and Martha. So how do you think we go about practically thinking through those things? And I would open it to Jillian or Randy, thinking through that as wives or even sisters, daughters, right? Members of the church.
Well, I think anxiety is contagious. And I think, I feel like if we know who we are, everything, if we truly understood, it would be really easy to be what we're supposed to be. But that's what's hard. And so I just jotted down a few verses. Philippians 4:4 talks about the anxiousness. If you ever have anything that makes you anxious, you need to give it to God. Matthew 6 talks about, God even notices the birds and he cares for them. Why do we worry about it? So I think because anxiety is contagious, it's almost like it would be better for us to be by ourselves and far away, because we would be doing less damage. That's sort of what I took from it.
So I know we're almost out of time, and in this go round. So I'm going to try to wrap it up quickly. I really appreciate this conversation, and please feel free to join us again next month, December. We're going to wrap things up with the culmination of wisdom, and we hope that you can join us there. And of course, go anytime to asharedinheritance.com to get other recorded lessons and In the Trenches articles. Thank you guys for joining us.